Hello there and welcome to Gallery Teachers Masterclass. My name is Hugh Dellar and I'm a teacher trainer and coursebook writer based in North London. I'm also the co-founder of the online language school and teacher development provider Lexical Lab. What I'm going to be talking about today is what we do as teachers when we try to teach vocabulary in the classroom. I'm going to be talking a bit about the way I've come to rethink what we do when we're doing vocabulary teaching, and what I've come to believe is best practice in the English language classroom when it comes to presenting and dealing with new vocabulary that emerges in class. So let's get started. As you can see, by the way, please do check out our content here. It's www.lexicallab.com. We're on Facebook and we're on Instagram for those of you that use those platforms.
Hugh, I've got something straight away I thought we could just look at, which is a really simple thing, but the difference between context and co-text.
So, I mean, this may be a distinction that we've basically kind of invented for ourselves. I mean, this is something we talk about in our methodology book, Teaching Lexically. And I guess the way I think about it is that context is to do with the situation in which a piece of language might be used. So it's to do with who's talking to who, or who's writing to who, when and why, and what is it they're talking about, okay? Whereas co-text is to do with other language often found or used around a piece of language that you're teaching or that you're looking at, okay? Or just around another piece of language. So if you take a word like arrest, well, if you're listening to a conversation about the word arrest, then the kinds of things that you might find in the co-text might be things like, you know, have they charged him yet? How long is he being kept in for? Do you know what he was picked up for? Has he spoken to his lawyer? There'll be all this kind of extra language that you might expect to hear. If it's a news story about someone being arrested, again, you'll expect to hear things like, he was detained last night at a certain place. He has been charged with, and then you'll have a list of things that you might be charged with. He's due to appear in court next Tuesday. So the context is, it's a news story about a crime or about someone being arrested. Or the context is, it's a conversation about someone who's been arrested. The co-text are specific bits of language that will frequently occur within those particular contexts, if you like.
Absolutely, and I use, sometimes it's interesting in the chat that people are sort of saying about colligation not being brought up in the initial teacher training courses.
Yeah, I know.
And it doesn't, I mean, I did come across it quite a long time ago when I was reading an article, I think English Teaching Professional, which I've popped in the chat box, by Michael Hoey. And it was the first time I'd seen the word colligation, and I was really excited about it. I was like, right, great. And then it seemed like that was too big a word to introduce people to, but do you actually use the term colligation with students or just with people that you're training?
With students, no.
Do you use the word collocation with students?
No. I just literally kind of go, these words go together. Look at this pattern. Look, yeah. It works like this. Okay. I mean, like I've just seen Gabby say in the box that she does. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to do that. I tend to kind of feel that this stuff is learned not through having a conceptual of understanding of what it is, but through experience and exposure over time. And so I don't think it's a bad thing if students at a certain level are told this is a collocation, these words go together. Or, you know, this is the grammatical pattern that goes with this word. Maybe it's different in your language. I think for teachers themselves who are developing and thinking more about their own classroom practice, they're both very important ideas to be aware of, because they give you as a teacher a way of thinking about what you're doing in the classroom and what kind of examples you're giving and why you're giving examples in the way that you're giving them.
Yeah, and we're thinking about core meaning, absolutely, aren't we? So I
Yeah.
think what's really important was what you said. I think one of the most common criticisms I have when I'm watching particularly new teachers, but also really experienced teachers in the classroom, is how, particularly if a word crops up. So if you've got a text and you've planned what's coming, it's different. You might have a lovely prepared scenario. You've got all your fantastic models, examples. It's those things that crop up in class that the teacher tries to deal with. And then they pull random examples from thin air, none of which relate to each other, and just cause a big sea of confusion. Do you think there's a way of avoiding that happening?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I run this Facebook group called English Questions Answered, and there was a question on there this week, which was a guy who was teaching from outcomes, and he'd had this expression in there saying everything went smoothly. Okay. And one of the students, he'd then explained that smoothly was the adverb of smooth. And one of the students said, oh, the opposite of rough. And he then said, yes, like a rough area from the other lesson. And then the student said, can I say a smooth area? And very quickly, it kind of starts spiraling out of control into some kind of, attempt to teach everything that you might ever want to do with all the different forms of a word across its different word families. When really in that situation, for me, I'm looking at that thinking, well, you just need to say everything went smoothly. It went well. There weren't any problems. Okay. And then maybe you need to have a quick think about what other kind of things might you say went smoothly apart from the meeting or apart from the webinar. Okay. And, it's thinking about it just as teaching that. I think what happens is, the reason it happens is because people aren't going deep enough into the co-text, and instead they're obsessed with trying to cover every possible meaning of that word. And so I think if you think about it as it's went smoothly, and that's the collocation that you're teaching, or the meeting went smoothly, and you explain the meaning in that context, and then you think about other things that you might also say went smoothly, okay? That saves you getting into any of that extra stuff that doesn't need to happen. So I think it's just trying to get better at doing that more often. I know for myself, when I was younger, I often used to kind of end up teaching random separate meanings of words where I'd say, I'm not that bothered, but you can also say sorry to bother you, and you can and you kind of overload people without really doing enough with each particular example. And I think these days I'd rather spend the time doing more with one example than overloading them with lots of extra things which aren't really necessarily connected, apart from they have one word linking them.
Absolutely. So I think I was looking today as well at thinking about it. This is so easy for us, Hugh, you and I, and native speakers. So we can sit here and just preach to people and say, oh, think about the co-text, think about what goes either side, look at 7 or 8 words before, after, etc. Think about all the different examples. And I was looking about how corpus dictionaries were sort of made. And quite interestingly, I just saw 2 simple things, which was one that they use observation of loads and loads of different examples. Well, that requires exposure to loads of different examples. So if you're not in a country where you are exposed to loads of examples, I'm wondering what you do about that. And also they suggest that they use a slightly inaccurate model of, this is when they're not using the computer generated examples, by the way, of introspection, asking people to think inside their brain everything you know about a word, which is where I think you get what you've just said. You regurgitate everything you know about a word which isn't relevant to that particular context.
Yeah.
And how on earth could a non-native speaker do that anyway? So how do you think non-native speakers can start to put together these skills that we innately have? It's no effort for us.
Also, I'm going to challenge the question, actually, because I don't think native speakers do innately have that. And I don't think I had that ability for a long time as a teacher. And I've seen lots of native speaker teachers who don't do any of this, and who give terrible examples and terrible explanations and have very weird board work. And for a long time, I think I was probably that teacher. I think these are things that all of us learn to get better at over time, and by thinking about how language works and how we've heard language used. I think also up to a point, even though there's a lot of overlap between, you know, my English, your English, Hedvig's English, Janice's English, whoever's English, we also all have our own English, okay? And we are all the products of the language that we've been exposed to and that we've experienced ourselves. And learning to access that and think about that takes time and it takes effort. And I think there's a hell of a lot of non-native speaker teachers out there who are so super fluent anyway, and who have already had to think about a lot of these things as they've progressed themselves with their own language, because they've come up against these barriers and they've sort of had to think, oh God, it works differently in English to the way it works in, you know, my own language, whatever my own language is.
So you'd argue they're more aware.
Well, I think often once the seed has been planted and the idea has been planted, there is often a greater awareness of that because of the experience of having to learn a foreign language to a level where you can teach it. Whereas for natives, it's often this kind of sort of, I don't know, overconfidence sometimes about, I speak English like a native. And you're like, right, can you give me an example of how to use the word like this? And I know it from doing teacher training over the years. I've seen it so many times where if you say, you know, say you see an example like, inflation's gone up a lot in recent years, and the students say, teacher, go up. I've literally seen natives kind of say, well, balloons go up. Okay. And it's like, yeah, balloons do go up. But one, why would you tell anybody that balloons go up? Two, it's not really the same as inflation's gone up a lot over recent years. One of them's a literal statement. One of them's more metaphorical. You know, it's a bad example on many, many levels, I think. And that's just an inexperienced teacher, native or non-native, scrabbling around after being put on the spot thinking, oh my God, how do I answer this question? I think in terms of how you get better at it, in a way, it's the same for both natives and non-natives, okay? Which is you have a look at what you're going to be teaching. You think about the level you're teaching. You have a look at any language that you think might be tricky for the students within what you're going to be teaching. You think about how you're going to explain it. Sometimes even when I'm teaching books I've written myself, I'm looking at the language before the class and I'm thinking, repercussion, not sure I've got a great example up my sleeve of how I would use repercussion. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just quickly go to the Cambridge Dictionary, the Macmillan Dictionary online. I'm going to have a look at their explanations. I'm going to make a couple of notes of some examples. And then when I'm in the classroom and someone asks me, yeah, Hugh, what about repercussion? It's like, oh, thank you for asking. And it looks like I'm doing that spontaneously, but that's the result of planning and preparation. Yeah. And that's after 30 years of teaching. I'm still doing that.
Do you have a go-to place that, like you just said, going to Cambridge Dictionary? Like I think the Advanced Learner Dictionary and things, they often give a lot more information about colligation.
I mean, I really like the Cambridge Advanced Online Dictionary. I think it's great. And they've got that section with, I think the example, the explanations are really concisely done.
Yeah.
And I think they offer you this little button where it says more examples.
Yeah, I'll just pop that in the chat box actually, because I've got that link available here. So I'll just add that for people that haven't maybe used it. And Macmillan Dictionary as well, it's got some nice stuff.
Yeah, it has.
About corpus. So how do you think then people can, let's say, okay, if I rephrase my question, so I think you're right that native speakers don't always, unless they haven't thought through things, they can try and ad lib, but they're, at least when they ad lib, they're more likely to produce, now what would be the adverb for this? Because can you say a collocated accurate example, a colligated accurate example? Because you're naturally going to put the right grammar or glue either side of something, aren't you? More likely. Whereas a non-native speaker is going to have to work harder to make sure, for example, they've got the right preposition or the right. Do you see what I mean?
I do, but I'm just not sure it's true. I see so many native. I have seen so many natives over the years give so many weird, bad explanations and examples, and I just think it's to do with experience rather than to do with what language you grew up speaking. It's also obviously to do with level, okay? And, you know, if you are an intermediate level speaker yourself and you're teaching, say, pre-intermediate students, you can only teach your own English in a sense. And I think all of us, when we're put on the spot or when we're forced to give answers, whether we're native or non-native, you can only answer a question within the limits of your own experience if you haven't had time to think about it or prepare it before. And sometimes you'll be wrong, and sometimes you won't know the answer. I mean, I've had situations where, as a native speaker, people kind of assume you're the fount of all knowledge. And students of mine have asked me, what does X mean? And I'll say, oh, I've never heard it. I think you must have heard it wrong. It's not English. And they'll kind of go, look, it's here in this magazine. And then you have to kind of say, right, okay, well, I've never seen that before, and I don't know, I haven't encountered it before.
Like you said, we've all got our own vocabulary, haven't we? We've got sort of a personal, like, idiolective, just stuff that's really class, and then the quantity of words that we know or that are relevant or that we're exposed to. So if somebody hit me with a whole load of financial English, I wouldn't have a clue.
Well, exactly. And sometimes, I mean, on this group I have, English Questions Answered, a lot of the best answers come from non-natives, and a lot of the worst answers come from natives. And I think, especially with particular kind of niche areas like legal English or financial English, there are people out there who are like bilingual translators and stuff, and they know way more of that language than I do. About once a month on there, we get a question about something that's legal English, and I just have no idea. I have to Google it and kind of try and feel some sense of what the word is used to mean. There'll be someone on there who has taught that before and who is familiar with that language because that's their niche specialist kind of area. I think also, even now, when I'm on the spot sometimes and I'm giving examples or I'm trying to reformulate something a student has said, I later go away and I think about what I've written, or I think about the example I've given, or if I'm co-teaching with Andrew, my writing partner, we'll look at each other's examples and we'll sometimes kind of say, what kind of example is that? That's a rubbish example. What would you have said? I would have said it like this. Oh, so obvious. And that happens to everybody. Again, whether you're native or non-native, I think that feeling of being called upon on the spot to come up with something that you have to rely on your intuition. Usually your intuition will stand you in good stead, but sometimes it will let you down. I think sometimes also what both native and non-native teachers do that can be very effective is to say, that's a really good question, I'm not sure. Let's have a Google, let's have a look, let's see how it works. Look like that. And you look up repercussion and, you take it from there.
That is a really good strategy, definitely, because I think particularly new teachers, particularly when they're coming on training courses, are really worried that they're expected to be a dictionary themselves, to know everything, to know all of the grammar. And I think for me, what was really lovely, quite a way in my career, I was asked to mark module 3 Delta, not module 3, sorry, the module 1, the examination. And it was just coming up with a panel of people. So there's sort of 8 language experts, of whom I would consider myself to be the least expert, but I was sitting around a table, with people like Martin Parrott, who's obviously written amazing grammar books.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'd be looking at an example and he'd be going, you know what, I've never thought about that. I don't know.
I know. I mean,
is there anybody that knows? And you would have to work that out together, because I think what students sometimes don't want to accept is that language is so fluid. Yeah. It's not black and white.
Yeah.
So how do you get over that in the classroom? There are so many learners that are still quite dogmatic about the fact they want an answer, and there aren't always answers.
Well, I think you just have to keep telling people, I understand that you would like this to be black and white, but it isn't, okay? And, language isn't pure maths or anything like that. Language isn't the study of logic. Language is often quite weird and quite random. And also there are often many routes to the same eventual destination. And ambiguity and uncertainty is a natural, normal part of all language use. And I think you just have to have those conversations with students. And I mean, it took me a long time to realize this as a teacher myself. And I can remember trying to come up with, I think it's one of the ways in which teachers often dig themselves in knots as well. Again, another question that came up recently was, why can't I say the Tuesday's lesson has been cancelled? Why can't I put a definite article? And I was watching loads of people coming up with theories as to why you can't do this. And every time someone did it, you'd sort of go, well, that theory doesn't stand up, because what about this? And teachers desperately try to explain these things away. And I think in those kind of situations, that's very tempting to do. But in the end, you just have to say to some students, look, I know you want an explanation. I know you're looking for a rule. The rule is you don't use the here with this word, okay? It just doesn't work here, okay? Don't ask me why, it just doesn't. And I think a lot of language is also like that, where you can't always explain it logically. Sometimes, you know, it's like with that thing I was talking about in the video about why don't you say something has been happened, because it has been happened by somebody. Well, logically, that makes perfect sense. But why is it active in English? I mean, I don't know. It just is. And I can understand why, if it's passive in your language, you'd want it to be passive in English, but I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way.
You have to learn to be tolerant of ambiguity, don't they?
Yeah, and just to accept that things are the way they are, no matter how annoying or frustrating or stupid they seem to you based on your own first language experience.
I think some of what you said, yeah, there's can I get to Gabby's question?
Of course you can.
I think it will kind of come in, but I think actually a lot of what you're saying is what we know to be true, is that it is just crucial to have really good models. I've recently, and on Tuesday was talking about the work of Barak Rosenshine, where he's talking about the principles of language learning, and he talks about good models. Yeah, and I think that is a danger, that experienced teachers kind of will try to wing it, and they haven't thought through their model. And like you said, perhaps a non-native teacher or the newer teachers had to go more miles to create a good, to plan really well and prepare. So thinking about how we can help people produce good models in the first place, do you have any practical?
Yeah, I do. So I would say
at planning stage.
Yeah. Think about how you use the words yourself. Okay. Think about the kinds of things you might say or that you think you've heard said using those words. You can also just do quick Googles for things. So, I mean, I did a video this morning about getting your wires crossed. And one of the things I did is I went on Twitter and I just put in speech marks, got our wires crossed, and I looked at loads of examples of what people were doing with it. So you can do things like that, or you look at news stories and you see what comes up when you put in get our wires crossed, and you look at some examples. I think you can also just think about, particularly with certain words, what would you say with them in your own first language? Okay. How does that work if you put it into English? Like, what do you just generally do with that word in English? So if you think about something like inflation's gone up 10% in the last 6 months, well, what else might you say in your own first language if you're a kind of L2 speaker teacher of English, a non-native speaker teacher of English? What other similar kinds of examples to that might you say either in English or in your own first language? What other things might go up in this kind of way? And, maybe just have a quick Google, has gone up 10%, and see what else goes up 10%. And it'll be things like unemployment, house prices. I can predict with that one what most of the most common kind of examples will be, but I might also find a couple of examples where you think, oh, that's interesting. Okay, the death rate's got the divorce rate's gone up 10% since the start of the pandemic. Well, that's a great example. I'll bring that into class. So it's doing all of those things. It's kind of thinking about what you do, thinking about what you've heard done, having a look at examples, maybe drawing on your own L1 experience and seeing how that works in English as well.
That L1 thing you're saying, do you think in a way that people who teach monolingual classes, if they speak the language of the students, there's actually a massive advantage, because there you can do some contrastive analysis.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
One sentence in English, and then you can pull out the colligations.
Exactly.
Exactly. We use this preposition, you're using that.
Exactly. So I mean, if you are like a Russian speaking teacher and you're working with monolingual Russian speaking classes and you're teaching, you know, I was recommended to, that kind of, or whatever that one I said in the sentence in the video was, you can kind of say, yeah, so in Russian we'd say blah, 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 blah. In English, they do it slightly differently. In Japanese, we would say blah, 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 blah. Be careful. Don't translate that as I was stolen my mobile phone. In English, they say it like this. And I think that kind of knowledge of L1, L2 is really, really useful. Really useful.
You could use something like questionnaire rods as well to lay out patterns and see something.
Yeah, yeah, or you know,
coloring phrases, highlighting.
Or you do kind of Quizlet cards where you've got L1, L2 versions, and you kind of catch those little, you know, you can set up little traps to test students' memory and see how much they remember about the different patterns from one language to another.
Heidi's got a question about the importance of measuring progress and checking the teacher's own efficiency. So how do you check your own efficiency in your teaching, she's asking?
So I think the main way, sorry again, Anna?
I think maybe she means effectiveness, maybe.
Yeah.
Not just efficient. Yeah.
Okay. So I think the main way is to build in very regular formal and informal kind of soft testing, if you like. Okay. And I would do that in a variety of different ways. I would do that through revision exercises at the beginning of each class, where I can see how much has gone in and how much the students remember. And I can add a little bit more to what they've done already. I do it by repeating tasks across different lessons or with different students and checking how well students are performing those tasks and what language they're using. Maybe you do a particular task in one class, you give some feedback on it, you tell the students next lesson we're going to redo that, so have a look at the feedback, you do it again, you see how much they've taken on board. When I'm doing things like that kind of board work I was talking about in the video, it's a kind of soft test because I'm gapping certain words, I'm paraphrasing and eliciting certain kinds of words. I'm seeing, oh, well done, you remembered that, good, that was from last lesson. And all of that is a way of making learning visible in the classroom. It might also be things like, you know, in pairs, retell what you remember about a reading text or a listening text we did last lesson. And then collectively with the whole group kind of retelling it, re-lexicalizing it, re-grammaring it, seeing if they can remember the actual language that was used in the texts. And through that, you get a sense of, sorry, Anna, go on.
We talked about that on Tuesday as well, and maybe using a starter mat or something at the beginning of the lesson just to pull out something you've just done and keep going back over it again. And again.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to like when you're learning an instrument where, you know, you learn a song and just because you've played it once, it really doesn't mean it's in there at all. It means you've just played it once. And it's like, well, play it again, you know, see if you can play it a little bit faster this time. See if you can get the bridge into the chorus a bit better. And it's...
I've got another challenge for you, Hugh, because obviously you've written a few books. I've got a book I really like, but it's not in English. I don't know if you've seen this. So I know we get a lot of MFL teachers.
Is it Gianfranco Conti?
Yeah. I love his, so Italian sentence builders are exactly what you're saying, because you get loads and loads of extra examples again and again, but we don't seem to have, that book doesn't seem to exist on the ELT market of just really simply, because I don't think this is like Raymond Murphy, that's sort of all gap or something, but just seeing generative, lots of examples of the same thing, but slightly different. And you're also giving the student a chance to have a lot of practice with quite high accuracy. And then by the time they get to trying it themselves, there's going to be a fewer mistakes and you can really get down to the nitty gritty differences. But do you think there's anything similar to that on the market, or are you going to write one for us?
It's not up to me, it's up to the publishers generally. I mean, no, in a sense, it's what we've tried to do with our low-level course books over the years with innovations and with outcomes. And we've tried to build in a lot of that kind of recycling with slight variations over time and across units and across low levels. No, I like what Gianfranco does, and I think there's a lot of overlap with where I'm coming from.
With MFL, with the foreign language. And can you, because people are also asking in the chat box about sort of recommending things. I mean, in terms of I mean, obviously not your own course books, because that's a whole course book, but books about chunking and collocation, and let's think, you know, Michael Lewis aside and all of this kind of stuff. But I mean, this is another one that I think is not bad.
Yeah.
But maybe you've got a much better suggestion if somebody's kind of new to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'll just put a few notes
where they might go.
So I think a book, it's only an e-book, but it's called Messaging by George Woolard, is really good.
And what will we find in that kind of book?
He sort of talks about this whole idea of thinking about how we text the language which we're using. Okay, so if you're learning a word like bother, okay, well, what's the message that you're conveying with bother? Okay, if it's I couldn't be bothered, what is it you couldn't be bothered to do? And it's about kind of working from the word to the chunk to the message and building that into what you do as a teacher. So I think that's a really, really nice book. It's dirt cheap and it's an ebook. Obviously, I'm going to just have a quick tout for my own Teaching Lexically book there. I think there's another really nice book called Lexical Grammar by Leo Sullivan that covers similar kind of territory. He has quite a lot of ideas on things that teachers themselves can do or that trainers can do with teachers in terms of exploring colligation and the kind of limitations of chunks and the way in which chunks kind of vary but not infinitely. And he has some nice stuff on that kind of thing there. So those are good places to start.
I was thinking also just on a really practical thing, would you say, like, if somebody, because we had a few things in the Q&A, just in terms of vocabulary and how you record it on the board, like you said, is it worth necessarily dividing things into verbs, nouns, whatever? I guess it depends. But what it is useful, I think, for some students is to label whether something is a noun or verb, or help them with word count, because that can be quite useful for all those exam classes where they need to start manipulating, transforming things. So do you just not do that at all then?
I don't do it at all.
So you agree with that?
I don't find personally students have problems recognizing what the verb and what the noun is. I really
context.
Yeah, because the context basically. So, you know, even if it's a very, very low level beginner kind of class and you have like, what's your name? Students kind of get that name's the noun and is the verb. You know, what's her name? They still kind of get, oh, that's a different version of is, and that's the noun still. Okay.
Would you put up a bit maybe about prawn, where you've got a word that could be a verb or a noun and then the pronunciation shift? So like, I don't know, like produce and produce, or again, you're saying it's just not
I've just stopped doing all of that. I used to, because things like headway used to force me to do it. And in the end, all that I remember is the pain of having to try to go to export, but you export. Which one is it again? I just used to drive me mad, those lessons.
And if you've got a sentence, you're going to know, aren't you?
Yeah, basically, you know, you're going to know, you know. And if you pronounce it slightly differently, is it really going to affect comprehensibility? Generally not, you know.
So I think that raises a really good point, Hugh, that you said about like essentially one of the really important things is generating loads of examples and then giving students loads of practice, and then it's in the feedback that you're going to be able to pull out all those differences in colligation, isn't it, by seeing where they trip up, like you said, set traps or leave
I mean, it's both. It's both in, I mean, as a writer, it's in the material I'm writing. As a teacher, it's in the examples I'm giving, both when I'm speaking and when I'm writing up on the board or on my Word document or whatever it is, depending how I'm teaching. And it's then as part of the feedback that I'm giving on what I hear students do. I think it's just also accepting. I think a lot of teachers are way too hung up on the idea of accuracy, okay? My main foreign language is Indonesian, and I've been speaking Indonesian on and off for 25 years. My wife's Indonesian. I used to live in Indonesia. I will never be a native speaker of Indonesian. It's not going to happen, okay? I will never probably get to a stage where I don't make mistakes, and I will never get to a stage where I can read everything I ever encounter. I don't think. Okay. And I'm fine with that. You know, I've just kind of accepted that. And I kind of feel like, well, if that's me after 25 years of a language that my wife speaks as her mother tongue from a country I used to live in, what are you expecting from your intermediate students? What, you're really worried that they're still making mistakes? Of course they're making mistakes. They're intermediate. By definition, they're going to make mistakes. And I think it's just recognizing that something Andrew, my co-author, said to me the other day, which was, the thing we forget is that if you want to sound like most people's fluent English, you need to hear most people's fluent English. And that's going to take you thousands of hours to do. And
fluent English has mistakes in it, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it's just recognizing that you're not going to get there after a 150-hour course or a 300-hour course or a 450-hour course. It's not going to happen. There has to be a hell of a lot of input that goes on as well on top.
How mindful do you think you are that when you're generating loads of examples in the classroom, obviously you're thinking about things that are personal to you for that elaborative encoding and giving your own personalized examples? What if your examples mean absolutely nothing to students? How do you make it sticky for them?
It never happens.
Never happens.
You try to avoid that, I guess. And I think thinking about that and being aware of the fact that that's a possibility is important, because that's the first step to avoiding it occurring. I would say it definitely used to happen to me in the first kind of, being realistic, probably 8 or 9 years of my teaching career. And I don't think I was conscious enough of what it was that my students might want to try and say or do with the words. And even now, sometimes I think probably my examples might be culturally limited or culturally bound, or they might be about things that are in the news here. And so they're in my head, and that's what comes to mind when I'm thinking about how I've heard those words used.
Miming a lot. Do you use pictures as well? Or
low levels, yeah, definitely.
So you don't use visuals with higher learners. You're relying on verbal explanation more.
Yeah, generally. But I mean, it depends. I mean, every now and then there may be something which is easier just to kind of go, look, it's one of these, and you draw up a quick picture of it. It really depends what it is. But low levels, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because I'm a big fan of pictures kind of at all levels. But again, I think that you can sometimes be unaware that you're culturally bound by your picture as well.
Yeah.
It's saying, because we've had lots of trainees, you say, oh, draw a skyscraper, and they draw a skyscraper, but it's not a skyscraper unless it's got the context of other tall buildings near it and it's towering over it massively. So you've also got to be mindful that it's not just your verbal models, but pictorial models actually need thought, because, you know, if you and I went on the internet and looked for a particular image, we would probably have a different version of an explanation of what that thing is.
Yeah. No, and I mean, it's interesting sometimes when you Google image things and you look at things and kind of go, seriously, that's that? Okay. I wouldn't call that myself, you know. So yeah, you have to be aware of all of those things. And yeah, every view contains the viewer. Yeah,
great. I was going to also just say one final thing of just that teachingenglish.org has an article which is like the word family framework that can help people look at things, but just with the caveat that it's not always great with all the colligations. But I think perhaps for people that are trying to explore more language, that could be another app to go. But I think you've put loads of great books on, really, so I think we've kind of
it's never ending,
load of food for thought.
I hope so.